Hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom. Giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bashim Yahushai, Bashim Rakakwadash, double honors to the apostles and elders, great millstone, for teaching us the truth and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwathim. And listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to read through this article here. It says Saudi Arabia reluctantly, it says reluctant, which just means unwilling, reluctantly enters U.S.-Iran war. So, on the screen, I have on the screen an image of the ancient Achaemenid Empire, also known as the Empire of the Persians and the Medes, which was prophesied by our forefather Daniel. And this is some of the different regions, provinces that they had, right? So I'm going to get to that later on, but I wanted to read through this article. But first, I guess let me start off with this precept, before I actually get into it. This is Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 1, because these are all signs of exactly what's going on. These are wars and rumors of wars, right? And we're living in a time where certain prophecies are being fulfilled, right? So our people are very caught up in the what's it called, the different affairs, the different situations, glitz, glamour, or whatever, what I'm saying. And this is a time to actually seek the Lord while he may be found. And so this is verse 1 in Ecclesiastes 12, and it says, "Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, and nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them, while the sun, or the light, or the moon, or the stars be not darkened, nor the clouds return after the rain," right? So, we're living in a situation, this is a situation where, I know our people still have the opportunity, to seek the Lord while he may be found, before those evil days come, right? Because, there's a lot of judgment that's going to fall upon these nations, especially, America, right? Especially America. So, let me get to the article, and Lord's will, this will be edifying. And it says here, Saudi Arabia entered the U.S.-Iran war on Wednesday, so with airstrikes in Iraq, and it says it delayed entry 6 months into the war, and illustrated the bind the kingdom faces as it tries to deter attacks without getting sucked into the border conflict, analysts say, right? This is really and truly, when you really think about it, it's all the Lord's doing. And it says the kingdom's defense ministry announces the airstrikes accusing Iran-backed militias in Iraq of attacking Saudi oil facilities this week. It says no Iraqi militias have claimed responsibility for the attacks. It says, however, the Saudi government statements appeared keen to portray the strikes as a limited reaction to specific attacks rather than the entry into the wider U.S. and Israeli war with Iran, right? So this is very interesting too. As a matter of fact, let me read this and I'll make my point. The kingdom confirms that it's not seeking escalation, but that it will respond to any aggression, says the Saudi Defense Ministry spokesman, Major General Turki al-Malki. It says his statement invoked the right of self-defense and quoted a line from the Quran calling for believers to attack those who attack them in similar manner. It says his language underscored the dilemma that the Saudi Arabia has faced um, since the United States and Israel attacked Iran in February, setting off a military conflagration across the region and threatening the kingdom's security and the economic ambitions. Let me just get that word because I actually don't know what that means. So, conflagration in the AI overview, it says it is a large destructive fire or a major violent conflict like a war. It says it could be a literal fire, a very big out of control fire that burns up a large area, you know, buildings or forests and causes heavy damage. It says that's pretty much it. So it could be a large out of control fire that destroys, forests, buildings, infrastructure, whatever, right? Just for more understanding of what's actually being spoken of here. Um, it says, while the Saudi Arabia has had long antagonistic relations with Iran, Saudi officials have been pursuing warmer ties for several years, viewing them as the most pragmatic way to manage the threat posed by Iran. I was actually just looking that up, just earlier, and it says this is pretty much so basically there's a difference between the kind of sect of Islam that they follow. So here it says Saudi is a Sunni Muslim monarchy, while Iran is a Shia Islamic theocracy. Right? It's the same religion, but these are just two different sects of Islam, right? Or of the Islamic faith, essentially, right? Um, it says here the war dashed efforts at diplomacy. In retaliation against U.S. attacks, Iran launched thousands of missiles and drones, and Persian Gulf states that hosts U.S. military installations, including Saudi Arabia, right? So let me get two precepts, because the article keeps mentioning U.S. and Israel, right? So now you're seeing other nations are slowly being pulled in because they were trying to basically avoid a conflict, right? So this conflict started, it started to like culminate like within, they said, February, right? So February, we're in the end of July now you're seeing that there is Saudi Arabia. Now they've basically like if this was a wrestling match, Saudi Arabia has stepped into the ring. That's basically like what's going on here, right? And the state of Israel is kind of like in the corner, so to speak, right? While U.S. is kind of like fighting, on pretty much on their behalf, right? So this is Proverbs 21:1, and it says, "The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, as the rivers of water. He turneth it whithersoever he will," right? So this is the mindset. They said they were reluctant, in pretty much joining, right? But this is the Lord's will for all these nations to be gathered, right? Is essentially for the controversy of Zion, for the third woe that is spoken of in Revelation, I believe the 11th chapter, right? That third woe represents that third world war, that war to end all wars, right? And this is the key telltale sign when you see all these wars, that this is not the kingdom of heaven, right? Because in the kingdom of heaven, there shall be no more wars. That is the key telltale sign that the folks, the tiny toppers in that land are not the real people, right? Nevertheless, Let me get another one because it mentioned of the state of Israel. Let me get this here. And now you're seeing Saudi Arabia being pulled in. This is Jeremiah 49, verse 20. And it says, "Therefore hear the counsel of the Lord Yahweh, that he hath taken against Edom and his purposes, and that he hath purposed against the inhabitants of Teman. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out." So now you have the state, that state of Israel drawing all these other nations into a war, right? So now you see that Saudi Arabia is being it's being pulled in to this mess between Iran and between the United States, right? And when you go through Ezekiel, the 38th chapter, there's many other key players that haven't stepped into the ring yet. So when you go through that chapter specifically, it outlines other team members that are supposed to back up um, Iran. So it mentions Gog, which represents Russia. So Russia, if this is a wrestling match, when you think about it, if you ever brothers ever seen wrestling, in the ring, Russia hasn't stepped in the ring yet, right? So they're those two, it shall be, as the scriptures say, they shall be a guard unto them, right? So this is what's going on right now. So the Lord is basically, they don't want to, they're saying this, but, this is the Lord's will, right? So um, let me continue on here, right? It says, where was I? Okay, so they were just saying how basically Saudi Arabia, they were trying to pursue more warmer ties because in the past years they haven't had basically they haven't had a lot of what's it called friendly, more diplomatic ties. There's always been a lot of tension between those two countries, right? So here it says this month, this I'm reading in the NY Times. It says the kingdom has also entered a renewed confrontation with Iran backed Houthi militia in Yemen, which claimed the responsibility of several attacks on Saudi soil and declared a blockade against Saudi tankers in the Red Sea. It says, I'm kind of just, hitting a couple points. It says this has also imposed an economic cost on Saudi Arabia by restricting routes for the export of oil, which provide the lifeblood of the Saudi government budget. It says, as fighting has dragged on, it has strained the kingdom's relations with Trump's administration, with American and Saudi officials increasingly at odds of how to approach the security of the region. So essentially, their economic prosperity is now being what's the word I'm looking for? It's now being it's, I don't want to say sabotage, but it's being affected, right? So now what does that do? It affects the quality of the life for your own citizens, right? And the king is trying to look out, for their own people, right? So now, it's time to, beat your, basically your what's the word I'm looking for? As it says in Joel, beat your plow your plowshares into swords, to roughly paraphrase, right? These nations are gearing up, more and more for war. So, you know, um, let me see. Let me read this here. Because on the screen, I'm not sure if I explained this. Iran is mentioned here, and I want to read this. I have an image on the screen. So this is some of the ancient provinces. If you zoom in real quick, if you have the ability to do so, one of those those provinces. It says Carmenia below the southern portion of Iran today, right? And I want to read it. So I want to read it in here. So this is Second Ezra 15 verse 28, and it says, "Behold, a horrible vision, and the appearance thereof from the east," right? So, from the Middle East. It says here, verse 29, "where the nations of the dragons of Arabia shall come out with many chariots, and the multitude of them shall be carried as the wind upon the earth, that all they that hear them may fear and tremble." So these Ishmaelites, they have lots of weaponry, technology, and it says, "It shall be carried upon the earth." So the Lord is coming to bring a judgment and to destroy these nations, right? So, this is a building up. This is an escalation of war, right? So this is really the point here. This is verse 13, 2nd Ezra chapter 15, and it says, "And also the Carmenians, raging in wrath, shall go forth as wild boars out of the wood, and with great power shall they come to join battle with them, and to waste a portion of the land of the Assyrians." So the Carmenians, this is referring to the country known as, what we know as, Iran today. And Assyrian is represents America today, right? So, this is, like I said before, it's adding more fuel to the fire. The Carmenians, so when you look here and you scroll right where you see right at the tip right here, so that where the narrow portion of this body of water here is, just slightly above where you see the Strait of Hormuz is, above it is the province of Carmenia, which today I believe it's called it's the city known as Kerman now, right? When you go into it, let's see, hold on, Carmenia, hold on, let me look that up. It says the Carmenians were an ancient Iranian tribe who lived in the historical region of Carmenia, which corresponds to the modern day province of Kerman in southeastern Iran. It says, let's see here, hold on. See if there's a little bit more. Okay, so here it says the Carmenians were a warlike people who said to live and fight like the Persians and the Medes, except they used donkeys even in war. Let's see, hold on. Let's see if I can get a little bit more off of this here. Hold on. So basically, they were known to be basically a warlike people. That's, just to kind of, solidify, things here, right? When you go back to, and it's funny how it mentions the word wild when you read in Second Ezra, because when you go into the birth of Abraham's son Ishmael, That's how Ishmael was described. One second. This is Genesis 16. This is verse 11, and it says, "And the angel of the Lord said to her, Behold, thou art with child, and thou shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction." Right, so he's one of the sons of Abraham, right? And it says here, "And he will be a wild man, and his hand will be against every man, and his every man hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren." Right, so this, let me get that word, hold on. I believe the word there is para'ah, if I'm not mistaken, that mentions wild. It says a wild ass, right? And it's funny how it mentions, when you go into the history of the Carmenians, they use donkeys, which is basically, it's an ass, right? It says the onager. So yeah, so the Hebrew word, yes, it's para'ah, right? It says a wild ass. An Asiatic wild ass is a species of family native to Asia, right? It says the onager was described and given a binomial name by German zoologist Peter Simon Pallas in 1775, right? So this is the word here, right? So I just thought it was very interesting. It also describes, Ishmael being it describes, the Carmenians as wild, Ishmael as wild, right? This is their nature, right? This is 2nd Ezra 15 and 31, and it says here, and then the dragons shall have the upper hand, the Ishmaelites, right? And remembering their nature, right? So basically, what I was saying is that nature to be wild. And it says, "For if they shall return themselves, conspiring together in great power, and persecute them," right? So this is the nature of what's of these people, right? And this is the nature of what's going on, right? So, you know, let me end off with this precept. Actually, this is one of my favorites. Actually, one second. Jeremiah 8. This is Jeremiah 8 verse 7, and it says, "Yea, the stork in the heaven knoweth her appointed times, and the turtle and the crane observe the time of their coming. But my people know not the judgment of the Lord," right? So even the animals know in their minds there are certain things they do, when they see certain things happening. So when they see there's a shortage of food and stuff like that, or there's a change in the seasons, they make certain preparations, right? They do certain things to actually make sure they're more well equipped, so and these are animals that we're speaking of. Like, for example, like I use this example of bears a lot. Bears, not to go too off topic, they tend to eat a lot, and they practice something known as hyperphagia. So hyper meaning above, and phagia meaning to eat. So essentially they eat a lot, right? So that being said, when it comes to our people don't see these things within the world today as essentially as an urgency. Our people lack urgency when it comes to trying to seek the Lord while he may be found, right? So this is a strong call to action when you see these things, to seek the Lord while he may be found, right? So anyways, I just thought I would just bring this out. Lord's will, this lesson was just quick and edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. Until next time, I say Shalom.